Well, hello. Thanks for joining me. This is for Friday. I'm going to look at 2 Samuel 13 and 14 today. I think of this commercial that was showing last year on TV by Apple about privacy and that privacy matters. And, it's a commercial that shows like no trespassing signs and shows like a shower curtain closing and filing cabinet closing and our fences around our homes. It shows two men like whispering to each other in a restaurant, and then when the server comes over to take their plates away, like they stop and they sit up, and then when she leaves they go back to whispering to each other. And it goes on about how privacy matters in our homes or in our personal lives, so privacy should matter on our phones. And yes, very much so, there's things that should be kept private, like our credit card numbers and social security card numbers. But really, in general, that commercial just really bothers me because privacy, something that I've been saying a bunch, is privacy is the death of integrity. When we try to keep things hidden and private, it's when we lose our integrity and we start to live in sin. And that's what we see today in our passage. We see the string of bad choices in 2 Samuel 13 and 14. So we don't have time to read all of that. But the string of bad choices, a lot of it starting with privacy, that just lead to sin and major consequences. And so we see this story of Amnon lusting after his half-sister. And so because he burns with that and he doesn't control it and he doesn't turn to the Lord and trust God's good plan, he conspires, or he has his cousin, and they help devise a plan together that he can sleep with her, and so he rapes his half-sister Amnon, right? And he would have known God's law in Leviticus 18:11 that says, "You shall not uncover the nakedness of your father's wife's daughter," your sister, "brought up in your father's family, since she is your sister." Right there it says it. Okay, he would have known that. They would have known the law, and yet he still acted on it. And so then we see David not deal with it. And because of that, Absalom takes matters into his own hands. And then he murders He murders Amnon at a sheep shearing festival that he hosts, or a feast, just so he can get the family there. And when David doesn't come, he begs for Amnon to come instead, and then he murders him, right? And then again, David does nothing to deal with Absalom and his desire, him becoming a murderer. And so then Absalom flees, and then we see David bring him back in chapter 14. So we have this kind of cycle downwards of just undealt with sin. Amnon raping Tamar in seclusion, so in privacy, right? And we have this undealt with and all these consequences. And so I kind of see consequences here of secret sin. And maybe these don't all apply to every secret sin, but this is what we see in this passage. And certainly some of these apply pretty often. But one is ruined lives, right? First, we can talk about Tamar, that her life was ruined. It tells us that because of this, she would have been scorned as an object of reproach, right? It tells us in verse 20 that she tore her robe, which was a symbol of her ruined life. That robe that she was given was because she was a virgin daughter of the king. And so it symbolized that. And so she tore that of her ruined life. The hand on her head would have been a symbol of the exile and banishment that she was expecting because of this happening. And even though it wasn't her fault, she still would have faced the consequences of somebody else's choices. In verse 20, it tells us that she was desolate, which means she remained unmarried and childless. Consequences of somebody else's choices that ruined her life. It also would have affected Absalom, right? It did affect Absalom. The bitterness that he allowed to grow in his heart towards Amnon because of how it treated his half-sister, which would have been Absalom's full sister. He allows that bitterness to grow and to fester, and then 2 years later, he takes matters into his own hands because David doesn't deal with it, and he murders Amnon. And so he becomes a murderer. And of course, Amnon's life was ruined too. It tells us that he hated his own sister when he acted on that sin. That lust that he felt for her, which was described as love, instantly becomes hatred. And it says it was stronger than that love that he felt for her. And so he ruined his own life by acting on that sin as well. So we see ruined lives, our own when we choose to live in sin, and also the consequences of others that it affects. The second consequence of sin, we saw minimized significance. In verse 20, it says, went to the wrong chapter there. And her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." Those words just are painful. Like, don't take this to heart. No big deal. And we see minimized significance of the rape that was caused to Tamar. And I can't imagine a young woman hearing this after being violated. Don't take it to heart, right? No big deal. Just you'll be okay. I'll take you in. So he downplays what happens to Tamar. He minimizes the significance of this event. And that, again, can be a consequence of sin, of how we minimize it and act like it's not a big deal. And we ignore the consequences. And then, of course, we see David failing as a father and king. He had responsibility to deal with the sin within his family, both as king of the land, but also as the father of Amnon. And he would have known God's word and God's law, and yet it says he burns with anger, but he does nothing about it. And so because he abdicates his responsibilities, it continues this downward spiral of sin, where then Absalom takes it and becomes a murderer, and then Absalom flees, and so we just see David abdicate his responsibilities as a father and as a king, and the consequences of that. And eventually it destroys his family, right? Amnon's murdered. Eventually Absalom, when he's brought back, then tries and temporarily does overthrow David as king, and then he's killed. And so David's family is just torn apart because of this, because of Amnon's choices and because of David bailing on his responsibilities. And so all of this just kind of brings me to Ephesians 5, which isn't in our reading for today, but if they had followed this advice, which of course they didn't have at that time, but things would have been totally different. So Ephesians 5, 8 through 14a say this: "For at one time you were darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of light is found in all that is good and right and true. And try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. For it is shameful even to speak of the things that they do in secret. But when anything is exposed by the light, it becomes visible. For anything that becomes visible is light." And of course, this is where I get this whole idea of privacy is the death of integrity. Things that are exposed by the light lose their value, lose the hold that they have, right? When things are brought into the light and dealt with and exposed, it loses its strength that it has. And I've certainly seen this in my own life. For a long time, Lindsay had encouraged me to do counseling or do counseling with her, and I just resisted it. And it was my pride, just wanting to think that I didn't need it. I didn't need to talk to anyone, or I'm doing okay, or whatever. And for about, I think it's 6 or 7 weeks now, I've been going to counseling, and now I've been going with Lindsay. And a lot of it's just to deal with just kind of this issue of just holding things inside, not exposing them. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be sin related. For me, it was just not dealing with my emotions. Just anything, I just hide and bury things. And as we do that, we build up walls, right? It continues to be in this place of darkness, but as soon as the flashlight's turned on, that darkness is no longer complete. We start to expose things. And so in my own life, and my own marriage, and just being resistant, like in disagreements with Lindsay, where just not able to own up to mistakes and being okay with failure, it's caused me to live at times in a place of darkness within my own heart, even though I might act like it was okay. Because of not wanting to deal with it, because of not exposing things and putting things in the light, right? It says, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but expose them. When it's exposed by the light, it becomes visible. Anything that becomes visible is light. So God can take what's in the dark places of our hearts and turn it into light when we expose it and allow him into it. And so things lose its power when it's in the light. And yet we know that when we choose to live in darkness, that's a lonely place to live. And so we see the effects of sin and darkness in the lives of Amnon and Absalom, and the impact that it had on others around them and in their own lives. And so as believers, I'm not advocating for you to go expose everything in your life to everyone. That's not at all what this means, but we do not need to walk through life alone. We're not meant to just deal with things on our own. We're meant to put things into the light, to expose them, to confess sin, to share our struggles, and to allow others to walk alongside of us. And if these men had taken that same responsibility back in 2 Samuel, we would have seen a very different story and a very different outcome. And yet, I know as men, it's hard for us to do that. We want to feel like we can do it on our own, and it's often pride that gets in the way. But we see through God's word just the importance of community and unity and walking together through life. And so that's my encouragement to you today. That's my challenge for you today, is find people in your life that can help you walk through the dark places of your heart, whatever sins there or whatever things that you're not wanting to deal with or struggles that you have. You're not alone. And you can either choose to deal with it and allow it to become good and expose it in the light, or you can continue to hide things, and we see consequences and the effect of that when we choose to do that. Good news that God is light, and he brings light into our world and into our hearts, and good things come out of that. And so I'm so thankful for that in my own life, and I hope that you have seen that in your own lives, or are willing to see that in your own lives. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you have a great rest of your day. God bless.